Happy Sunday, everyone. Welcome to Our Issues Birmingham. Today's guest is Kyle Whitmire with AL.com, Alabama Media Group. I think I'm saying all those words. Reckon.com, all kinds of things. Twitter, War on Dumb. You're losing that war.
Well, anything you have a war on, right? War on drugs, war on poverty, war on crime, war on, it's not going to end well. So I just admitted that from the start. So
okay, I know there's some things going on in Huntsville we'd like to talk about that you've addressed recently, but before we go there, because it is connected to some legislation that passed during this last session. Now, while we're taping, we have one legislative day left. We now have what I would call medical marijuana light on the governor's desk awaiting signage. We have a casino/lottery gambling bill out there that I think has no chance of surviving to get to the governor's desk. But your thoughts on what's going on down there right now would be most appreciated by our audience.
Well, I think the hardest thing for people to understand about gambling legislation in Alabama is the complexity of it. Most people who want gambling in Alabama, what they really want is to be able to play Powerball without having to drive to the Georgia state line whenever the Powerball jackpot is over $500 million, right?
Yeah, you wouldn't.
That's what
you wouldn't drive for $50 million.
Right. And that's what most Alabamians want, but Alabama lawmakers do not represent most Alabamians. They represent their districts, the people in those districts, and the businesses in those districts. And what has conventionally become known as a clean lottery bill. It does things, it triggers a cascade of effects that a lot of Alabamians don't understand. The complicating factors here are, first, the complexity of our laws and the diversity of our lawmakers in their districts. So let's talk about the law first. If you legalize a lottery in Alabama, what's generally accepted is that triggers some little unintended consequences in the law that would essentially allow Indian casinos, the Porch Creek Indians, to have bona fide, full-blown slot machines, not bingo machines pretending to be slot machines at their casinos, and would give them a competitive advantage over non-Indian casinos. And the lawmakers who represent those places where those casinos now exist in Birmingham and in Macon County and in Greene County and Mobile, they're going to fight against that. So they appear to be fighting against a lottery, but really they're fighting against
each other,
an advantage for Indian casinos.
Each other.
So I mean, very quickly this gets really complex. So suddenly you have like all these different competing factions who all have to be brought together in agreement on a deal that includes Porch Creek Indian friendly Republicans, Democrats who have casinos in their districts. And it just gets to be a mess. And we get back to the same place every year where all these different parties meet on this one battlefield and they fight to a draw and nobody wins.
Well, I guess, as I was trying to say, they're fighting against one another.
So, yeah. I mean, it is not, as a lot of Alabamians seem to believe, that it's sort of like religious prudes versus, a minority of lawmakers who might support gambling. It's actually, 2 or 3 or 4 different gambling interests fighting against each other.
Yeah.
That keep this from happening. And this plays out every single year.
Well, I mean, the most obvious question is what happens to the counties where gambling is bingo is currently legal, like Greene County,
Well, and
I think what
the
I
answer is
read
they
was
could be. If you had the so-called clean lottery bill, they could lose hundreds or even thousands of jobs, and that's their primary concern. Even within those counties, like in Greene County, part of the one compromise that's been on the table this whole session would favor probably Green Track, but not other gambling facilities in Greene County. The same goes for gambling facilities in Lowndes County and the Whitehall Casino, right? There are other gambling facilities in Alabama that would be put out of business by this bill. And they have, people who are friendly to them in the Alabama legislature. And this thing is going to travel by such a razor thin margin that, 2 or 3 votes is what determines whether this bill lives or dies.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the voters of Alabama. So even then it's not clean.
Well, I'm
Sorry,
not encouraged.
I know that's a mouthful for everybody to take on at the same time, but it's really complicated.
I'm not encouraged
No.
by this conversation with the likelihood of passage come the end of this session, which is approaching within the next week or so, and probably will have happened by the time this airs. We're going to take a short break, come back and talk about something other than gambling. Don't go away. This is Our Issues Birmingham. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham, talking with Kyle Whitmire about the state of our legislative body and their recent session, which is probably over by now. But there was a medical marijuana bill passed that seems to have a lot of conditions built into it. I learned just recently that PMS and other female associated pain issues were removed from the bill, but were removed, it was pointed out to me, by a female legislator. So I don't know, does that make it okay? I don't know, but give us your thoughts on what did actually pass. I think most people feel the governor will sign it because it did pass rather handedly. So
I think more likely is that she's going to. We don't have a pocket veto in Alabama. If the governor does not sign a bill within a certain number of days, it sort of passes into law without her signature. That's what I'm hearing is what's most likely to happen here. She could change her mind, but look, this is movement. This is in a legislative session where not a lot has happened, not a lot has moved. I think this counts as an achievement. Just a few years ago, one of the very, very early medical marijuana bills got what they call the Shroud Award in the legislature, which is in the House. They give a sort of a resolution that jokingly gives this honor to the deadest bill of the legislative session. And in just a few years, this went from a dead on arrival issue to something that it was able to get through the legislature when nothing else really could, or few other things could.
Oh yeah, I remember talking to Patricia. It is.
I think it is testimony to the hard work of 2 lawmakers, Representative Mike Ball and Senator Tim Melson, who have been advocates for this for the last several years, and have really slowly changed minds of lawmakers down there. But let's face it, I think Alabamians, most Americans are coming around on this issue. 91% of Americans, according to Pew Research, now believe that medical marijuana should be legal. I'm not sure that 91% of Americans agree on anything that, Canada is north of the United States or our capital is in Washington, D.C. It's just like, uh, in this day and age, that's really remarkable that many people can agree on something, even here in Alabama. So
Well, I think that's a function of people getting older and
it's people
and
getting
a
older, and I
generational
think it's
movement.
people knowing, one thing we heard a lot in the committee hearings for this bill was testimony, some of it from lawmakers, about loved ones that they knew who had debilitating diseases, who had cancer, who had other afflictions, that legally, illegally, whatever, that this helped. And it opened their eyes, changed their attitudes about it. But still, I mean, there was fierce resistance to this bill from a minority of lawmakers who filibustered it for a day and a half in the Alabama House. But it made its way. I think it's going to make its way into law unless Governor Ivey vetoes it. I find that scenario to be very unlikely.
You had 20 some odd district attorneys from across the state come out in opposition in almost, it was like reefer madness mentality to me.
Well, and they cited a former New York Times reporter named Alex Berenson, who's sort of gone off the deep end of credibility, who wrote sort of this scary screed against the legalization of marijuana. But he also is out there at the same time denying that coronavirus is a real thing and telling people that vaccines kill more people than the coronavirus does. And this is someone that these district attorneys, I think there were 28 or 23, I can't remember how many there were, it was in the 20s, cited as a credible source. And it really kind of scared me that if this is what prosecutors in our state would consider a credible witness, so to speak, what are they doing in our courtrooms? I mean,
well,
that's
not much for the past year.
It really gave me pause.
Well, not much for the past year.
I know I'm talking to a defense lawyer here, but
I understand.
Really, that should frighten people.
Yeah, well, it is frightening, and some of those counties I don't like to go to, and I don't. So, not many, but a few. I have good relationships with the DAs and the DAs Association, and I understand their positions. I know our local DA, Jefferson County, does not oppose this bill.
Well, and I think, look, as I said in my column on this subject, when in college, I've used marijuana maybe a half dozen times in my life, and I learned a few things from it. One, it could help people who are sick, but most importantly, people don't need to be going to jail for this.
Right.
I mean, it's just, I think we're past this point, and
especially in
it's going to be a hard thing for these prosecutors to admit, though, that a lot of people that they've put in jail over the years may not have belonged there.
Especially in a state with limited resources when it comes to our prison system to begin with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break and come back and talk about something else I'd like to explore with you that you've written about lately. This is Our Issues Birmingham. I'm Tommy Spina. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Our Issues Birmingham. I'm talking with Kyle Whitmire, and I want to talk about a piece of legislation that did pass and has been signed into law, and it dealt with background checks on law enforcement officers. And I know recently we've had a horribly tragic event that is quite contentious up in Madison County, I guess you would call that. But can you speak to that bill and what that bill does and how that might affect law enforcement going forward and the fears out there that everyone has that we're like trying to remove law enforcement from our lives so that we're just this crazy, unmonitored, vigilante type justice system?
Look, we had a problem decades ago where we had people teaching in our school systems who had no business teaching in school systems because they had criminal backgrounds that included sexual assault, child predation, that sort of thing. And so it became necessary and it just made sense to begin having background checks on education employees to make sure that they weren't moving from school to school to school, trying to stay one step ahead of accusations and one step ahead of their past. That made perfect sense. And I think what this bill in the legislature does is take that same concept and apply it to police departments, to where you have a database so that when one police department is making hiring decisions, when they're recruiting new officers, they know whether or not those officers have had issues in other places. And that just makes sense.
And they haven't?
It's just
that hasn't existed until now?
What's that?
That hasn't existed until now? So if I want to,
not that I,
if
not,
I'm a
not to
police
my
officer,
knowledge.
if I'm a police officer with a bad history at one municipality and I make a application to go to a different municipality, nobody has to disclose why
Well,
you left
and look
the
at
other
what
one?
just happened just this past week. We had an ALEA agent, ALEA officer, who had been, I think, fired from the FBI, right? And they find out after the fact that why this guy was fired, and not only that, he had fabricated a letter basically saying he had been cleared of the allegations against him that got him fired from his old job, when that just wasn't true. There's, I think we do have a problem of there are some police officers who move from one jurisdiction to another to they're running away from issues and taking those issues with them where they go. And I think this is a cure for that problem.
So going forward, then, this bill requires the creation of a database
Correct.
that compiles historical information on anyone who's been approved to be in law enforcement.
Correct.
It reminds me, and it's probably a horrible thing to say, but I'll say it anyway, that in Johnny Cochran's closing in the O.J. Simpson case, one of his arguments was, who's policing the police? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what this bill is about. And of course, it's been brought about by all the tension that's been created by some events that have occurred throughout the country and even in our own state. So nobody's really trying to knock the police or say they're bad people, but they need supervision within their own ranks, just like teachers, as you said before.
Well, and look, if you have an instance where, I mean, we've seen this happen several times where something horrible happens, attention is brought to a particular police officer. You find out after the fact that this officer's had a history of these problems in other places, and someone asks, well, why didn't they know about that? Well, it's because, in some cases because they just didn't have the means to know what happened, where their hirees came from. This cures that.
I just find it hard to believe that, although I do believe that a job application at a police department wouldn't have a question that says, have you ever been the subject of a disciplinary proceeding? Of course they could lie, and there would be no way to cross-check it. And surely, maybe I should have a police officer on. Maybe I need to have someone from ALEA address this, or some agency. Because, I want them to have a say, and I'm sure their legislative lobbyists were there when this bill was put in place. Surely they're in favor of it. Are they?
Well, I think that the fact that this bill has made it through the legislature this year shows that there's not, I will say no objection to it, but there's not strenuous objection to it.
Yeah.
This just makes sense. It's been past time for this to be law, yeah. And soon it will be.
Well, in our last minute, what else would you like to share with us about Montgomery and what's happening in the Capitol?
I expect that soon, if not by the time this is broadcast, Kay Ivey will announce her re-election campaign. She is one of Alabama's more popular governors in my lifetime, but that doesn't make this a cakewalk for her. And be careful or be mindful of some political posturing on her part, doing things such as ending federally funded unemployment benefits, saying that we don't have enough employees, workers in the state, when in fact our unemployment rate is lower than when she got into office. So,
yeah. Okay, we'll keep our guard up. Thanks for your insight, and we appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We'll see you next time you're on. This is Our Issues Birmingham. We'll see you next week.
Roll over. When you adopt a shelter pet, you discover all the things that make them unique.
And your mother.
They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love.